welcome to welcome to Understanding and Challenging Oppression in U.S. Food Systems. And let me just share my screen or start our conversation. And yeah, I just have like a really simple discussion question that I wanted to start out with. I was going to do this in breakout rooms, but since there's only a few of us in the meeting right now, wanted to go ahead and let's just do it as a larger group. So I have a real simple question, but it seems deceivingly simple. Let's just talk about what food even is. So how would you define what food is? Let's say to an alien from outer space, like someone who has no familiarity with human energy needs, how humans have cultivated food, how we utilize food. How would you explain what food even is?
Well, food is what provides humans the ability to live and function and process, create our energy, our humanness.
Mm-hmm. I like that. Yeah. So it provides us energy to actually be human. It uplifts our humanness. I really like that. Other folks and folks who just joined, we're talking about this question. What is food? How would you describe what food is to an alien who has no understanding of our nutritional needs, how we cultivate food, anything like that? Any other thoughts on this question?
I'm just going to keep putting stuff in the chat, Reagan, to try and save my voice. But I said it's also something that around which we build community and culture and relationships.
Oh, awesome. Yes, thank you for that. So yes, thinking about community, thinking about it's an expression of culture, how we build relationships with one another. We of course have that famous phrase about breaking bread with somebody, that there's something significant to many human societies, if not all of them, about sharing a meal with someone and what that represents and how you can build community with that. Excellent. And then I'm just reposting what Stephanie had posted about kind of some housekeeping notes for folks who just joined as well. Oh, and then yeah, Maritza, I absolutely love that. So an expression of love and care. So actually the labor and the time you put into food, it's an expression of love and care. And that is also a part of the cultural and emotional significance for of food for a lot of us. So excellent. Great. Well, let's talk a little bit about food. I'm going to tell you a story about blueberries and the different lenses we can use to actually think about or examine food. So one story I could tell about blueberries is a nutritional story. So like a half a cup of blueberries, hey, that has 42 calories and 1 gram of protein and very little fat and some good carbohydrates and some good fiber, etc. I don't know why they listed carbohydrates and sugar. I think they're talking about like they're probably differentiating between like maybe more simple sugars and then more complex carbohydrates. But yeah, you can tell a nutritional story about blueberries. And I just copied that from Google, Googling like what the nutritional value of a half a cup of blueberries is. So that's one story, or one way we can look at food is its nutritional content. We can think about the culinary kind of story, like what common foods do we eat or make with blueberries. So you can think about blueberries as a culinary kind of item that we use to make other foods that we enjoy. So some very popular ones in the US are blueberry pancakes, blueberry muffins, pretty ubiquitous. So if you see muffins, people will expect blueberries specifically, right? They're just like, if all you have is like banana nut muffins and lemon muffins, people are like, what is this? Where's the blueberry muffins? That's the standard muffin. It's a big favorite amongst pancakes as well. Blueberry pie. So we can think about the culinary story of food. We can think about how we utilize food to create other kinds of dishes or foods or cuisines that we enjoy. We can also talk about the cultivation history of food. So blueberries have actually been eaten in North America for over, oh, sorry, that's a typo, 13,000 years. Native Americans were actually the first to use them for like medicinal purposes and for natural flavoring. So the juice was actually medicinal and its own medicine. Blueberry pulp was used as its own medicine. Blueberries that were crushed up like turned into a paste that could be used as like a flavoring and other stuff. And then in 1911, Elizabeth White, who was a farmer, and Frederick Coville, who was a botanist, these folks actually figured out a way to cultivate blueberries, because the sentiment before that time was that blueberries were very difficult to cultivate. You couldn't actually grow them commercially. You just had to pick wild blueberries. So they joined forces and figured out a way to cultivate blueberries. And through a lot of processes that they innovated, blueberries actually experienced the boom of inclusion in a lot of foods and kind of getting elevated to a significant cultural food in the United States. It got elevated in 1942 and through 1963. That was the time when blueberries became this kind of staple of our diet. So we can think about the cultivation history of blueberries. We can think about the economic story or an economic lens to think about blueberries. So Michigan, of course, is the nation's leading producer of blueberries. So they are producing about 110 million pounds, valued at $130 million. And also the US is a net importer of both fresh and frozen blueberries. So in 2017, the nation imported 137 million pounds of fresh blueberries, and that was valued at $842 million. So we are importing nearly 1 billion in blueberries, as well as producing a bunch of our own blueberries. So we started off with this food wasn't even that common in our diet in the 1911s, and now food has totally, the food of blueberries has totally expanded into such a point where we're importing nearly $1 billion in blueberries. Finally, here's an interesting way. Think about the color theory of blueberries. So blue foods are actually really uncommon in nature. Why is that? Well, there's actually, there's specific compounds that make up pigments, and blue colored pigmented foods are rarer in nature because the blue anthocyanin, I believe is how you call it, it's actually less stable than other kinds of pigments. So other kind of pigments will be dominant, like green pigments are more dominant, red pigments are more dominant. Blue pigments, again, they break apart more, or they're more, what's the word I'm looking for? Like recessive, they're more recessive than other types of pigments. So if you've never noticed that, yeah, blue foods are actually more uncommon in nature than other colors of foods. So there's all of these different ways that we can look at food. There's all these different lenses we can put on, right? So what I'm going to do today is I'm just going to have us think about food through the lens of oppression. What goes into how our food gets produced? What does food mean to us in terms of our interpersonal relationships? What kinds of things do we internalize around food based on how food gets represented and talked about? So I want you to think of this presentation as another lens, another way to think about food. There's so many different lenses and ways to think about it, but we're going to think about it using the lens of oppression. And what do we see? What comes up when we think about food through this lens? So part of the framework I'm going to be using today is called the 4 Eyes of Oppression, if you've never heard of this framework. So it's a framework for understanding how oppression operates in society. And all oppressive systems, whether we're talking about racism, sexism, heterosexism and homophobia, ableism, ageism, all oppressive systems actually operate on these 4 fundamental levels. So there is the ideological level. Think about this as ways of thinking, storytelling, media representation. So how do ideas get created? How do ideas get reinforced? All oppressive systems start with ideologies. They start with the way people get sorted and ranked. So when every oppressive system has a hierarchy to it, basically, and in order to create a hierarchy, you first have to sort people into different groups or categories, then you have to rank them. So ideology is where that sorting and ranking happen. And we have ideologies about all different kinds of things as well as people. So there are food-based ideologies. There are ideologies about the body that we're going to talk about. So that's the first level of an oppressive system. Second is institutional. So this is thinking about what laws and policies and rules govern our society. How do things actually operate or function? How are resources distributed in our society? And by resources, I mean political, economic, social, and environmental resources. So we're going to think about the institution of agriculture and thinking about what food production really looks like in our country through a couple of different lenses around that. Interpersonal, this has to do with our interactions with one another. So how do we treat one another? How do we engage with one another? This has to do with things like language, our physical interactions, things like violence that happens on the interpersonal level. All oppressive systems have an interpersonal element in terms of how we engage with each other as individuals or as groups. And then lastly, the internalized level. So how does the existence of oppression, how does it impact our beliefs about ourselves? How does it impact our psychological, emotional, and even physiological health and wellness? And we can think a lot about what role food plays in that. So again, like, how do the other three I's start to influence our thinking, our sense of self, our ways of relating to ourselves? So this is the model that I'm going to use just to give some context to the different ways I'm going to talk about oppression and food systems today. Any questions on the 4 I's of oppression model? Okay, not seeing any. So before we go into ideological oppression, one thing that I just want to highlight is one critical way we can think about food is if we think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and what needs humans need to get met in their life. We have base physiological needs, right? So food is actually the most basic need that we have, alongside water, alongside warmth, alongside rest. And once we have that secured, then the next thing we're usually looking for is safety and security. So if, like, for instance, you are living in a country that's going through a civil war and you literally have no idea if a bomb is going to go off or if you might be attacked in the street, that is deeply psychologically harmful to folks, where they don't have basic safety or security, don't feel like they have a sense of normalcy in their daily life or expectations. Above that, we have love and belonging needs. It's actually the next most important need, and sometimes it doesn't get spoken about like that. So our friendships, our intimate relationships, our sense of community, feeling connected with other people in our lives, that is our next most important need. Then we have esteem needs, which is feeling like you have a contribution to make, feeling like you have accomplishments you can be proud of in your life, feeling like people don't just love you, but they appreciate having you around. Again, you have something that you are valued for in your community. And then finally, there's self-actualization needs. So this is the quintessential human need. So other animals don't even have this need. This is a quintessential human need. And I see your hand, Maggie, so give me just a moment. This is our need to feel like our life and our legacy matters, that we have lived a life well lived, and that we have made a unique contribution to the world. So not just that we have made a contribution, but a unique contribution. There was stuff that no one else but me could contribute to the world, and I feel like I have left a legacy. I've left something to be proud of. And part of the reason that's a core human need is our understandings about death. We know that we came from somewhere, right? We arrived and are living, And we know that we're going somewhere. There's a point in time where we're not going to be here. And that creates, that underpins this self-actualization need. It's that awareness of death and that unique awareness of death that we have as humans that even other animals don't necessarily have to that same extent. It drives us to say, what is my time here worth? What is it that I'm going to do with my time here? The point I want to make, and then I'll get to your question, Maggie, is that if you are spending the majority of your time seeking out and trying to secure food and water and rest, your brain is going to focus on that first, and you have less and less ability to focus on these other needs. Many people, millions and millions of people on the planet don't even get a chance to get to the need of self-actualization. Many of them are struggling their entire lives just to secure food and water and just to secure safety and security. So one of the first things I want to make, one of the first cases I want to make about oppressive systems and food is we need to remember the tragedy that is the lack of food so many people have, the lack of security around food that so many people have, struggling for clean, healthy, accessible food, struggling with clean water. That is a part of what our considerations about food are. It's a fundamental human need, and there is manufactured scarcity in our world where some people are struggling with that and trying to attain that their entire lives. Let's sit with the fact that that's happening to millions of people across the planet, and some people are living their whole lives without even getting to approach self-actualization, to approach living their best lives and being able to feel like they've had a life well lived. Maggie, you had a question?
Yes, actually, the Maslow's hierarchy is a very valuable thing, and everything you're saying is very valuable. I want to just augment it or contrast it in Virginia Postrel in her Substance of Style, and I'm formerly an image consultant, so it works with people expressing their authentic self. She uncovered evidence that this hierarchy doesn't hold up in that humans really make an effort to express themselves, as in women that are under oppression by the Taliban still paint their fingernails with fingernail polish, even though they're being highly oppressed. And a lot of the adornment of people in third world nations and tribal cultures adorn themselves to express themselves. So that's sort of a self-esteem and self-actualization of wanting to express themselves, even though they may be struggling with very basic needs. So I just wanted to highlight that, but your points are very well taken. But if you look at cultures, everywhere, even third world nations and people living in poverty, many of them seek to show themselves, their authentic selves, or express themselves as unique individuals or actualizing themselves while they're still struggling.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And that's if you could put the name of that person in chat, I would love to read just more about that person's work. I think of this as so kind of what you're talking about is how humans can resist whatever our conditions are. And that is always the case in terms of how we have agency, how we have autonomy, how we can make choices, even living under oppressive conditions or within oppressive systems. So yes, there are always ways that folks people can challenge this, resist it, find different methods for getting all of their needs met, regardless of whether one particular need is not being fully met. I like to think of this as kind of, where does your attention go? Where does your energy go? When you are feeling hungry, that definitely impedes, right, your desire to, most of the time, it would impede your desire to say, I want to create art, or I want to read this book, or I want to think about the structure of my society and what's wrong with them. I actually want to examine the society I live in. your mental energy, your time, your focus will tend to go to meeting that basic need first, and then more energy will be given to like kind of the next level of your needs. Like that's how I like to think about it. It isn't like, I wish there was a way that this was done that wasn't a hierarchy, and maybe somebody else has like revisualized this in a way that kind of gets at what I'm talking about. But yeah, like there are people who, as we just talked about, spending so much of their time and energy on meeting their basic needs, not getting to spend as much time or no time on some of these other really more deeply human, deeply philosophical and important needs, all the way up to self-actualization. So I think both of your point and my point fit together well. And I think, yeah, it's just like, I don't like necessarily that this is considered a hierarchy, even though I think it makes sense in that way, but it's kind of like, where does your energy and focus go first? Awesome, thank you for that discussion. And then, and also somebody mentioned that Maslow's hierarchy was based on like Blackfoot knowledge as well, which I hadn't heard, so I'm going to look into that too. This is I imagine a philosophy or an idea that has come up in multiple human societies, because it's pretty it's somewhat instinctual for us to be able to name a lot of these things as needs. So that's how one way we can start thinking about food, or one lens we can think about food through. And again, thinking about oppressive systems denying people basic needs, which limits their ability to access some of those other important and fundamental needs. So now I'm just going to talk about some ideology about food, and ways we have learned to think about food and our bodies in the United States. And to some extent, Western culture. So what do I mean by ideology? I mean our beliefs, our morals. I mean what underpins our culture. I mean our ethics, our vision, all of that's good stuff. Ideology, again, think of it as ways of thinking, collective agreements we have with one another about how we're going to operate and engage with one another. Think about ideology as again, media representation, imagery, how ideas around people and our culture are crafted, are solidified. So that's what I mean by ideology. It's related as the same root word as idea. And ideology is basically how these ways of thinking get crafted. What are the ways of thinking, and then how they get crafted. So we have a notion in the United States that shows up pretty often, and it's this notion that food is fuel, that food is energy that you're providing your body, and that's its fundamental role or function. This idea about food as fuel for your body, as the main role of food, it actually comes from a place that relates to a certain philosophical way of thinking about the body called dualism. So there's Western mind and body dualism. Dualism is the notion that the mind and the body are distinct and non-identical entities. My mind is really me. My mind is that which is most authentically me, and my body is that which is carrying me. My body is kind of a machine or an engine or something that houses the real me. But my mind and my soul are the real me, and my body is just a mechanism that my mind and my soul use. Monism is that the mind and the body are manifestations of a single substance. They together holistically make who you are. There is no separation between the mind and the body. The body has its own intelligence. The body has its own wisdom, and the two are not separable. So your mind, your body, and your soul, they are one united thing. In Japan, this concept is called kokoro. This unified interconnection of the mind, the body, and the soul. So in this essay, I want to talk to you a little bit more about this notion of the mind and body as separate, the body as kind of a machine, and then how we think about food as again, fuel for that machine. So this is from a dissertation, Mind Over Matter, Expressions of Mind-Body Dualism in Thinspiration. So this person is talking about mind and body dualism and how it shows up in communities that are essentially promote and exasperate eating disorders, things like bulimia and anorexia. Mind-body dualism shows up a lot in how they talk about the body. And there's a specific notion of having control over your body. Your body is something that you need to manage and maintain and control. And that shows up in diet culture, and it shows up in a lot of eating disorders that people have and how they think about their body. So in Volatile Bodies, towards a corporal feminism, Elizabeth Gross suggests that the current understandings of the body are a legacy of mind-body dualism, or the assumption that there are two distinct, mutually exclusive, and mutually exhaustive substances, mind and body, each of which inhabits its own self-contained sphere. The dualistic model of mind and body often figures the mind as an immaterial entity, distinct from and in charge of the body. Critics of this conception of mind and body find that the duality creates a binary in which the body is denigrated because of its capacity for material degradation, weakness, and temptation. And that's a bit amorphous, but basically what she's saying here is that the writer of this essay, and Elizabeth Gross, they're saying that because we think of the mind and body as separate, we're kind of doing this binary thing where we're saying one is superior to the other. The mind is superior to the body because the body wastes away, the body degrades, the body is weak and prone to temptation. The mind is what is strong. The mind is what is our representation of our own power, our own will expressed. And so we view the body as something, again, we need to control, something that we need to exhibit strength over because the body itself is weakness. So just think about how this shows up in, again, how we talk about fitness and weight loss and diets. You will notice the word control shows up so often and how fitness and diets are talked about. How do you take control of your body? How do you take control of your appetite? Extreme control. How it's the notion of your hunger and your desire for food. That's something that your mind has power over. It doesn't matter what your body is saying it feels. It doesn't matter what your body wants. Your mind is going to actually restrain your body's desire for food, your body's sense of hunger. So mind over matter, and I won't get fatter. And fat phobia is going to be all over this presentation. So these are from different sources, including some of these Thinspiration communities. And these are examples, most of these examples showed up in the essay that I just referenced. But again, you will see the word control when it comes to how the body is thought about over and over and over again. How does the mind master the body? And again, that comes from a place. That is not how all cultures think about the body. There is a specific way in which we have learned to think about our bodies. And to then the extent food as merely fuel for our bodies, we have gotten that from a place. Again, it's called Western mind-body dualism. These are some quotes from Susan Bordeaux, who wrote a book, Unbearable Weight, and she's a feminist scholar, and she talks a lot about mind-body dualism in, again, diet, culture, and the way specifically women are taught to think about food and how this has feminist implications. So while the body is experienced as alien and outside, the soul or will is described as being trapped or confined in this alien jail, as one woman describes it. I feel caught in my body. I am a prisoner in my body. The theme is repeated again and again. A typical fantasy evocative of Plato imagines total liberation from the bodily prison. I wish I could get out of my body entirely and fly. Please, dear God, help me. I want to get out of my body. I want to get out. Ellen West, astute as always, sees a central meaning of her self-starvation in this ideal of being thin, of being without a body. I myself am a larger body person. So I'm a person who's considered overweight / obese. I'm a person who has struggled with, and I don't even want to say struggle. I I have experienced fat phobia in a way that if I didn't experience that externally, I would be very happy with my body, and I'm in a good relationship with my body. But I'm a person who frequently had a fantasy of like, I wish I could just unzip the back of myself and step out of my body, like a new thin person step out of it. This notion that I'm stuck in a body that does not result in the kind of treatment I want. So the way I get assessed as a fat person, being assessed as less intelligent, less attractive, less viable as a romantic partner. There's all kinds of studies about the kind of discrimination fat people get. Less likely to be elected for public office, less likely to get promoted, less likely to have higher salary offers when we get hired. So this notion that I'm trapped in a body that has been defined in a dehumanizing way. And think about that same notion and how it might come up for people with a disability, how it might come up for people who are non-white, how it might come up for people who are transgender. And this notion that, no, I'm in the wrong body and it's not, I'm not getting the reactions. My authentic self is not being seen in the way I want it to be seen based on this body that I'm in. And so oppression can even exacerbate this mind-body dualism. I'm being oppressed because of the body I am in. And if I just had a slightly different body, I might be able to live a different kind of life, have a different kind of experience. It can be really profound to think about how mind-body dualism, it can become even more of a focus if one is living in a body that is oppressed as well. And Maggie, did you have your hand up? Oh, no? Okay, sorry. Look at your physical hand was up. Interestingly enough, fat phobia actually emerged in history around the same time as anti-Blackness, and the two have many interesting intersections with one another. So fat phobia emerged as a justification for why Black people were inferior, and it was part of one of the fundamental constructions of anti-Blackness. Why are Black people inferior? They don't have control over their bodies. They are too voracious. They're always hungry for food or for dance or something like that. They are childlike in their relationship with their bodies. So fat phobia and anti-Blackness also have an interesting intersecting history. So here's some quotes that kind of demonstrate that. This is from Julian Joseph Berry, and this is like the late 1600s. He wrote an essay called Natural History of the Negro Race. He says, in our white species, the forehead is projecting and the mouth retreating, as if we were rather designed to think than to eat. In the Negro species, the forehead is retreating and the mouth projecting, as if he were made to eat rather than to think. John Barrow, an account of travels into the interior of Southern Africa. Unwilling to work and unable to think, with a mind disengaged from every sort of care and reflection, indulging to access in the gratification of every sensual appetite, the African peasant grows to an unwieldy size. So again, fat phobia and anti-Blackness, they actually emerge at similar points in history and kind of co-informed and justified one another. Again, from Susan Bordeaux on her book, Unbearable Weight, Feminism, Western Culture, and the Body. The body, far from being fundamentally stable, a cultural constant to which we must contrast all culturally relevant and institutional forms, is actually constantly in the grip, as Foucault puts it, of cultural practices. So the very way we think about our bodies and what the body is always a site of cultural interpretation, of cultural practices. We learn to think about our body based on the culture that we are in and the cultural practices that we engage in to maintain our body or to upkeep our body in ways that are culturally and socially acceptable. So think about the body as a cultural text, a site of cultural information, a site of cultural interpretation. And food as merely fuel for the body, food as merely, energy that the body needs to run itself. That is deeply, deeply connected to Western-minded body dualism. So anytime you hear food being talked about like that, as this is the best kind of fuel for your body, this is the best kind of food that your body needs in order to operate. It's most healthy way, in the most efficient way. This is going to be anti-cancer foods and anti-this foods. It's really speaking to a way of thinking about the body that is very specific. And so that is one mechanism around our ideologies around food. This way of thinking about the body informs our ideologies about food. Also, one more thing I want to talk about is we have ideologies about food production, and we actually get bombarded with imagery about wholesome food production in our society. So have you noticed how many food images from food companies, how many of them are like these large green landscapes, these beautiful farms, these healthy animals, the sun is shining and there's lots of green pasture, and it's invoking a time period of food production that doesn't really exist anymore. It's invoking this notion of the very small family-owned farm where they're producing food for themselves and maybe some extra food for the town that they're next to. And there's green pastures and sun shining and happy open pasture animals, all of that. We are being lied to essentially by food companies who are hiding the industrial production of much of our food. So the labels of many of our food companies, they actually actively promote an ideology about food production that isn't our reality and hasn't been our reality of food production for decades. That is also an ideology about food. Where does our food come from? What does food production in this country actually look like? And knowing that, we're going to go into institutional oppression, and we're going to talk about those systems of food production. So institutional oppression, again, thinking about laws, policies, thinking about how institutions behave, thinking about how things are produced, thinking about how resources are distributed. So in this case, we're going to be talking about the institutions of food production, and just we're going to touch on a little bit about those institutions, and then also limited structural food access. That many communities are lacking structural access to food, and we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. So the first question that many of you often can come to when you're talking about land and where our food gets produced, it's remembering that in the United States, our land came from a place. It came from Native American theft and genocide. So what is all the land that our food is getting produced on? It is stolen land. It is land that is a result of colonization. And what was done with that land? We enslaved folks and put them to work for making crops, making and cultivating cotton, coffee, sugarcane, labor-intensive crops. So land was stolen, and then land was used for agriculture with using enslaved labor. Agriculture and enslaved labor have always been closely linked in the United States. And even to this day, we still have a modern form of indentured servitude. Some would even say slavery. It's not exactly the same as race-based chattel slavery that we had in the past, but a form of enslavement in terms of modern agriculture and who is actually picking and producing our food. So this is from a 2019 news article called Abuse in Farming Profits and Exploitation. So it's basically talking about that. So how US farming profits from exploitation and brutality. So this is a little example about what is happening on a lot of farms within the US. So in June, a farm worker from Mexico who requested to remain anonymous for fear of retaliation was transported through a trafficking network from Monterrey to work on farms in Georgia. They paid the traffickers 20,000 pesos, or about $950, loaned from their mother, taking frequent trips back and forth to Monterrey before being told it was safe to leave. Then they were finally transported across the border. Initially, the workers were told they'd be working on a blueberry farm, but they were sent to a corn farming operation instead. We arrived at the house where we would live and had to clean the rooms ourselves. There were roaches, spiders, mosquitoes, and the mattresses were covered in lice, the worker said. The bathrooms and showers were dirty and clogged. The kitchen was horrible. We had no air conditioning in hot weather. The worker began work daily at 3 or 4 a.m. in the morning and worked till 3 or 4 p.m. with just one 15-minute lunch break, making $225 for 15 days of work. Again, $225 for 15 days of work. They heard rumors that several workers had died. The worker claimed that Haitian immigrants were also brought into the same network. This is a quote from that same article. Farm workers in the US, especially immigrant workers, have few protections. They were excluded from the National Labor Relations Act, passed in 1935, and from the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938. Workers in America's agricultural fields are regularly subjected to abuses ranging from high occurrences of sexual assault and harassment, wage theft, and safety issues, including injuries, fatalities on the job, and exposure to hazardous chemicals. This is a 2010 federal court case called the US versus Global Horizons. Again, this gives you an idea about some of the conditions we're talking about in modern US agriculture. So in September 2010, staff of guest worker recruiting giant Global Horizons were charged with operating a forced labor ring in 13 states, including Florida. Global Horizons CEO Mordecai Orion and 6 others were accused of holding 600 guest workers from Thailand against their will in what prosecutors called the largest human trafficking case in US history. FBI Special Agent Tom Simmons described the case as a classic bait and switch. They were telling the Thai workers one thing to lure them here. Then when they got here, their passports were taken away and they were held in forced servitude working in these farms. Of the 8 people originally indicted, 3 pleaded guilty. A Global Horizons manager pled guilty to conspiracy to violate the forced labor statute, and 2 field supervisors pled guilty to document servitude. A 4th defendant pled guilty in Thailand to recruitment fraud. And in July 2012, the DOJ dropped charges against the CEO and another Global Horizon executive. So this is frequently the case. Executives tend to not be held responsible. These things, even if an operation is busted up, another operation will arise under a different name, under a different shell company, and it just keeps getting shuffled around. So I'm not sure if many of you are aware, globally, there are more enslaved people globally today than there were at the height of the transatlantic slave trade. It's merely gone underground. It has merely gotten more obscure in terms of how it actually operates. So enslavement is not legal pretty much anywhere. There's some dispute about the legality of it in the US and in Europe and some other places based on how our constitutions are written or how certain laws are written. But slavery is ostensibly illegal across most of the globe. But this is how it's actually functioning, is we have basically enslavement, indentured servitude, forced labor happening all across food production systems in the US. We're going to watch a 6-minute clip. This is from a EEOC, or the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, a documentary they have called Rape in the Fields. So again, talking about the extreme cases of sexual harassment and abuse that women agricultural workers tend to face. And they face that due to their gender and also many times due to their immigration status. So the type of power these employers have over them makes them very vulnerable to sexual abuse and violence. So we're going to watch a clip from that. And then an organization is going to talk about some of their practices resisting that. So there's a specific initiative that this one organization, I believe they're a nonprofit, has to try to resist harassment in the fields. And then let me make sure my sound is being shared. Yes, okay.
There are over 500,000 women working in the fields of America. Most are undocumented immigrants. This is a story about the price many women pay to keep those jobs and to keep food on our tables.
La persona que nos ofreció el trabajo le dijo a mi papá, no, pues no tengo trabajo para usted. Pero dijo, pero para sus hijas sí tengo trabajo. Y entonces ya desde ahí empezó, cuando estábamos en el FIC, le empezaban a acosarnos horriblemente.
Nos miran como que ellos son los dueños de uno, que a la hora que ellos quieren tenerlo a uno, lo pueden tener.
No sé hablar inglés, no tengo papeles para trabajar, así que pues tengo que aguantar.
Tenía el control porque era un mayordomo, él era el que mandaba.
Una vez más, siguió y siguió y siguió.
Entonces cuando no accedes, no tienes trabajo a la temporada que viene.
Todo el mundo tenía miedo. Pueden hacerme daño o hacer daño a mi familia.
Harassment is part of the job, so to speak. Women are looked at as sex objects when they're out there in the field. Sexual harassment is an epidemic in the fields, and it again goes back to the vulnerability that women have, the farm worker women have. They work in isolated places. Many of them don't speak English. A lot of them don't even know the laws. They don't even know that they can report sexual harassment and that the employer can be responsible for that. And so they feel helpless.
If people were actually to understand the vulnerability that undocumented women are subjected to, one phone call and you'll be deported. I mean, let's recognize something. 1,400 people are deported every day from the United States of America. There is fear and real terror in the immigrant community.
Hundreds of charges by farm workers have been received nationwide, and they continue to come in all around the country.
How many criminal charges have resulted from all this?
I don't know of any criminal prosecutions that have been put forward in any of these farm worker cases.
Zero, as far as you know.
Zero, as far as I know, yeah.
For many women, fear continues in the fields. Maricruz Ladino was one of the few who had the courage to sue her employer. And after 4 long years, she settled her lawsuit.
No es tanto por lo económico, porque eso no te devuelve la integridad como mujer, el valor como mujer. Se me escuchó, por eso pienso que sí hubo justicia, pero se murió una parte de mí y eso no se puede devolver. Estoy mirando que esto no nomás a mí me está pasando. Le está pasando a muchas mujeres. Y si uno se queda callado, va a seguir. Es por eso que ahora prefiero hablar, que en mí muchas personas o muchas mujeres se reflejen y no se queden calladas, que reaccionen, no con violencia, sino de que hay leyes que las protegen. Estén con documentos o sin documentos. Tiene que hablar.
The bandana project started, I believe, in the Midwest, and it's been going on around the country.
It's art as a healing tool for women that don't have the money to go to a counselor or to go to a psychiatrist. One time, this woman stayed and stayed and stayed after the meeting, and then she comes up to me and she asked me for 4 bandanas. On the last bandana, she drew one big, ugly monster face and said, that's the abuser. That's the one that's been, abusing me every day at work, humiliating me. She kept saying that over and over. She had had a horrible situation out in the field, and it was eating her up.
The Bandana Project was something that allowed them to express it, to talk about it. And through discourse, that's where you find solutions, where you find self-esteem, where you find confidence.
I have seen the growth, development in her from how she was at the beginning to how she is now. It's amazing. Her self-esteem is so high because of that. She came forward and filed a lawsuit against that abuser. She won a lawsuit, and she got the strength because of the Bandana Project. I regard her as a very brave woman.
So that's an example of, again, oppression, gender and citizenship status-based oppression, and then also like a means of resistance, the Bandana Project. Yeah, some of that same stuff that we were talking about earlier in the presentation. Also, this is an example of structural inequities around food access. So for those of you who are familiar with redlining, you may know that redline communities are also communities that are more likely to be food deserts or food insecure communities. So redlined areas are basically places that, this is from the 1930s Federal Housing Administration. The Federal Housing Administration had a racialized housing policy in which majority Black and brown neighborhoods were redlined and deemed neighborhoods that were declining or dangerous neighborhoods that had low economic potential. And then people living in those neighborhoods could not get FHA loans to move into suburban areas. So these were majority, again, urban POC areas that were redlined, and they lost a lot of government resources, while other majority white communities and majority suburban communities gained a lot of resources. So redline communities to this day are also more likely to be food deserts, more likely not to have a grocery store within miles of the community. So this is a redlining map taken from Atlanta, and this is showing where convenience stores are located versus where a grocery store is located. So the redlined areas are highlighted here, and then you can see there's a virtual absence of grocery stores in those redline communities. There's one that you can see towards the bottom left, but all of the yellow dots, you can see how they're dispersed all across Atlanta, except in these redline areas. These areas have plenty of convenience stores, but are lacking grocery stores in these communities. That is a part of structural racism. It is actually a part of the design of how many communities were built. So again, food insecurity, who has access to food and who doesn't. There's a story about race there. There's a story about the history of oppression around race there. Marginalized people are also far more likely to be food insecure. Every single marginalized community, whether we're talking about people of color, women, transgender and non-binary people, low income and working class people, people who are undocumented, people with disabilities, etc. Every single marginalized community is also more likely to be food insecure, or statistically is more food insecure. So I just want to give you some examples here. Women shoulder a lot of the responsibility that puts their food security at risk. So women who are increasingly have to shoulder the burden of childcare, family caretaking, the cost and impact of pregnancy, they are often have an insufficient supply of food because they're spending that money on some other things like childcare. So especially single mothers, more likely to be food insecure. Women often cope with hunger in ways that are detrimental to their well-being. So again, making sure children have food even if you can't eat. Moms are more likely to skip meals so that their children have enough food, raising their likelihood of illness, obesity, stress, depression, and workplace absences. Parents, especially moms, lose productivity in the workplace when they forego eating. And food insecurity during pregnancy is often is an issue why women are also more food insecure. So women in lower wage jobs often forfeit income during pregnancies and immediately following the child's birth because of lack of paid sick leave, and that leads to food insecurity. Again, transgender adults are more likely to be food insecure. So this is from food insufficiency in transgender communities from the Williams Institute. In the last 7 days, which of these statements best describes the food in your household? Sometimes or often enough to eat. Twice as likely to be the case if you're transgender. In terms of intersecting marginalizations, transgender people of color are way more likely to not have enough food to eat compared to, again, cisgender white people. So we're looking at 28% not having enough to eat versus 6% of cisgender white folks. So this can kind of compound with race and being transgender or non-binary. So again, these are the 12 major oppressed identities within the US. Every single marginalized community is more likely to be food insecure. So who has access to food in our society? How is food distributed in our society? This is a part of the story of that. All marginalized groups are lacking equal access and equal opportunity for food. Next, I'm going to talk about interpersonal kind of issues regarding, again, food and how we engage with one another around our bodies and food. We tend to moralize food a lot with one another in terms of judging the what foods another person is eating and what we think that says about them in terms of their values, in terms of their self-control. There's that word control again. In terms of whether they represent a healthy person or have healthy habits. So there's this whole interpersonal thing going on with moralizing food. I remember, again, I'll use myself as an example. I remember one time I was working at Hunger Free Colorado and I was the administrative assistant and I was drinking a can of Coke and the executive director walks by and she's like, do you have any idea how much sugar is in that? And, said it in almost a disgusted tone. Like, why on earth would you ever be drinking a Coca-Cola? And the idea that my food choice was a bad food choice, an immoral food choice, represented a lack of understanding about what is harmful or dangerous about sugar, rather than I'm a person who's enjoying something that I knew I would get enjoyment out of and not thinking about the emotional or spiritual implications of that. Why does health always get reduced to physical health? What about emotional and mental and spiritual health, right? So I'm like, this Coke is helping me in a lot of different ways. It's really, really delicious and refreshing after a long day of work. But the idea, well, you could have had something without sugar in it, right? And that would have been the better, more moral food choice. The way we tend to moralize food with each other. Some people, it gets to the point where they're uncomfortable having lunch in front of other people, eating in front of other people, because the notion that, again, the food I have is worse or less morally justifiable than someone else's lunch. If someone else is over there eating a salad and I'm over there eating, a turkey sandwich, or I'm over there eating macaroni and cheese, the way that even gets looked at, again, especially if you're a person who's in a fat body or something like that, that gets doubly emphasized. But this is something that goes around with us interpersonally all the time, the way we moralize food. And think about how you've experienced that in your life. Think about how you might have done that to other people. Think about how food choices get managed in terms of, again, what you eat is who you are. What you eat represents you and what you care about. That shows up in our lives interpersonally very often. Additionally, again, thinking about the fat phobia as an oppressive system specifically. So this is a real billboard that PETA put out several years ago. And again, hey, you in a fat body, that's your immorality on display. That is you actually having evidence of how quote unquote problematic your food choices are. You really should be eating vegetarian, you really should be eating vegan, and then your body will display that you're a moral person, that you're a person who makes the right kind of choices. So fat phobia interpersonally, the slurs, the degradation, the harassment that fat people face, how we are ignored by doctors and other institutions, that is a big part of how we think about food. I have to avoid foods that might even potentially make me fat. Fat people have an inherently disordered relationship with food, and we can see that on their bodies, and we're judging them as, again, out of control, immoral people because of that. This is also a big part of how we think about food, the way food is, again, moralized and managed in our daily lives. And so much of that is avoidance of becoming fat, or harassment or attacking of those who are already fat. So we're going to watch a little spoken word poem from a spoken word poet talking about her experiences being fat. Oops, my volume is low. Okay. There we go.
The old joke goes, patient walks into the doctor's office, says, "Doctor, it hurts when I move my arm like this. What should I do?" And the doctor says, "So don't move your arm like that." Now, fat girl walks into doctor's office, says, "Doctor, it hurts when I move my arm like this. What should I do?" And the doctor says, "Have you considered weight loss surgery?" Fat girl walks into the doctor for a flu shot and gets a lecture about BMI. Fat girl walks into the doctor's with an earache and gets asked if she's ever eaten a salad. Fat girl walks into the doctor's office with a spider bite, and the doctor obsesses over how low her blood pressure is. Low for such a fat person anyway. Insists on checking it 3 times before he'll believe it. Forgets completely about the mass of purple spider venom that brought her here to begin with. Fat girl walks into the doctor's to ask about antidepressants and gets prescribed exercise instead, because obviously her depression is because of her fat, and obviously fat bodies never exercise and stay fat. Fat girl walks into the doctor's office for a standard 3-month follow-up appointment, and the doctor says, "Have you considered that weight loss surgery yet?" Fat girl gets tired of constantly being diagnosed as fat. So fat girl stops walking into the doctor's office. Fat girl walks into the world and says, "World, it hurts to exist like this." And the world says, "So stop existing like that." Fat girl walks through a world that would rather she slice herself open than to exist as she does. Side effects be damned. Fat girl walks through a world overrun with sidewalk doctors who claim to be concerned about her health. Side effects be damned. Fat girl walks into the world and still somehow manages to love her fat body. And the world says, "Stop glorifying obesity." Fat girl walks into the world and says, "I do not owe you shrinking, I do not owe you thinness, attempted thinness or desired thinness, because you assume thinness equals health. For that matter, I do not owe you health, perceived or otherwise, to receive basic respect. I am deserving of care. I am deserving to exist as I do. I am deserving of first, no harm done." And the world says that is the best joke we've heard all day.
Finger snaps, finger snaps. And yes, thank you in chat for naming that. That's Rachel Wiley. I could not remember her name in the moment because I originally got the video clip and her name wasn't attached. But yes, that is spoken word poet Rachel Riley, for those who'd like to see that. And Button Poetry has her video on YouTube. Last thing I want to say interpersonally about food is, again, food as a source of family, a connection, an expression of love. This is becoming a less common way to talk about food in our culture. It's, again, the food as fuel narrative, the food as a measurement of your moral worth, food as a measurement of your sufficiency as a person. That is more common, and it seems like we're losing more and more about what food can do to bring us together as family, as friends, as a community. how important food is to cultural expression and the uplifting of our culture, our cultural heritage, our family recipes. So this is a image taken from the well-liked movie in the Black community in America called Soul Food. And the family dinner table is a focal point of the entire movie. It was a point where the family could come together to make connections, to renew relationships with one another. And the movie is about when the family matriarch passes away, Big Mama, who's at the top of the table. They stop coming together for family dinner, and it's talking about the disconnection that emerges from the family. Not having those chances to connect, to talk, to humanize one another, it does harm that family's connection. And at the end of the movie, there's a family dinner that finally gets called by the youngest or one of the youngest grandchildren. And the emphasis is not that the only way to do this is through food, but the emphasis is that this is a way that many of us can and do connect with one another. And coming around a meal, there's something comforting and supportive about that. There's something that we rely upon. It's why a lot of our holidays rely upon a big meal, whether it's Easter dinner or Thanksgiving dinner or Christmas dinner. So I think we're losing this very relational element to food. So when I asked you earlier, what is food? Some of y'all name that. And I think that's important for us to remember and to also push back against the cultural narrative. Food is not just fuel. That is one lens to look at it, but there's also, again, the cultural lens and the familial lens and the emotional, spiritual lens and the joyous lens and the history and traditional lens. All of these different ways we can look at food. Let's stop putting it into this small box, this very limiting way of thinking about food as fuel only, food as a moral choice, food as a way to demonstrate the value of your body or a way to manage your body. And then lastly, I want to talk about internalized oppression. So again, internalized oppression is how these other three I's impact our beliefs about ourselves. It impacts how we view ourselves in response to the ideologies, institutions, and interpersonal interactions we experience in society. So to crystallize what I mean by that, this image on the right really drives home what I'm talking about when I talk about internalized oppression. So look at these faces on the outside, the dark faces on the outside of this image. These are the ideologies that are in people's minds or in people's heads. So there's the gender binary, biphobia, heterosexism, homophobia, transphobia, misogyny. Western mind and body dualism would be in here. Fat phobia would be in here. So these ideologies, they get, again, reinforced through media, through language, through representation, and they stick in people's minds. They craft ways of thinking that people have. Then those ideologies manifest through institutional or interpersonal means. That's what this middle layer is. So ideologies show up in the world through things like bullying and abuse and violence and criticism and denial and discrimination and slurs and judgment and political games and shaming. And then finally, what is the effect that that has on the person? So what does being dehumanized, what does being presented with dehumanizing ideologies and then having those ideologies operate in institutions and in your social interactions with folks, what does that do to your internal psychology? What are the results of that? So if the results are things like fear, anger, shame, guilt, depression, self-hatred, trauma, substance abuse, self-harm, stress, suicide. So being dehumanized is not just about hurt feelings. It causes psychological and even physiological trauma. So we need to think about when fat people aren't looked at as human, when people who make certain food choices aren't looked at as human, when the immigrants who are producing and picking our food, are harvesting our food, aren't looked at as human, when women in fields aren't looked at as human, etc. That is not just about hurt feelings, right? It's not just about the physical danger that those folks are in interpersonally. It's also about what psychological effects it has on people. And that's what you're looking at this middle layer, the fear, the anxiety, the self-hatred. The woman who was talking about that, she's like, there are things that have been stolen from me. There is a psychological harm that I'm still working through, even though my case got settled. That's what internalized depression is talking about. So again, using myself as an example, my internalized sense of self and its evolution over time. I'm in a much better place with my body as a fat person than I was, in my 20s. And it took years and years and years of practice. I've been encouraged to write a book about some of my practices because it wasn't anything anyone taught me. It was just stuff I figured out. Things like intentionally looking at myself naked in the mirror for 10 minutes and pointing out things that I like about myself, not feeding into my internal dialogue. I hate this. I need to fix this. Nope. We're not doing that. What do you like about your body? Focus on that. Use language in your mind to describe that. It was doing practices like that again, nobody taught me, but seemed to make sense, where I knew I had to get rid of what I had internalized about what being in a fat body meant and what my value was, or basically how valueless my body was based off of that, and building myself back up. This is also one of the things I did, looking for positive representations of fat people and people with bodies like mine. So this is a poster that I got from an anime convention in downtown Denver called Nandeskan. And this is a character from a show, Steven Universe. This is Garnet. And this was the only poster out of 28 artists that had any kind of body diversity. So everyone else was your very typical thin heroine or hero. Everyone had the same kind of body, but then I saw this picture. I was like, what is this? And I was just so amazed at this image because I had never seen an image quite like this before. A woman of color, and Garnet is, the racial components of her character are complicated because she's an alien, but essentially she's portrayed as having darker skin. And many people kind of draw her as a Black woman as well. So she's a darker skinned woman. She has this beautiful, amazing artistic outfit. She is drawn in this curvaceous way that is emphasizing, again, her, we're looking at her and saying, this is beautiful, this is sexy, this is someone I want to look like, this is someone I would want to date, this is somebody who I would want to be, etc. And I had never seen an image with all of those things together. With this level of artistry, the effort that was put into her representation, her outfit, etc., and for her to also be a real character in a real show I could watch. All of those things I had never seen before. So this image meant a lot to me. I actually had an arrested reaction to it, like my breath caught in my chest. And I was like, I must have this, and who is this, and I must have this. And it was my phone background for a whole year because I just loved looking at that image so much. So this is how we start to heal our internalized trauma, our internalized dehumanizing narratives. This is how we start to think about our bodies differently, how we think of differently about the role of food in our lives. Food as joy, food as connection, rather than food as the enemy, and food as something that needs to be managed and controlled. I also want to make one more point about kind of class and food. So this is a quote from Gwyneth Paltrow that many people have heard before. I would rather die than let my, this got cut off. But she would say, I'd rather die than let my kids eat a cup of soup. So again, like that represents, to her, a cup of soup represents, again, inferiority. It represents a kind of class dynamic about, of course, my kids are going to eat the most exclusive, the most organic, the most nutritionally dense, the most colorful, the best kind of food. It's only like, it's only marginalized people, only poor people, only people who don't make good food choices that would eat a cup of soup. And it shows how there is an elitist ideology around a lot of food we eat that has class implications. I remember, so when I worked at Hunger Free Colorado, we did a lot of blogs and posting about the SNAP challenge. So if you're not aware of the SNAP challenge, it's there's a certain amount of money that people, like there's a maximum amount of money that people get on SNAP which is also formerly known as food stamps or governmental food assistance. And the average amount that people get, they're expected to live on what is a pretty meager budget in terms of their food. So at this time period, it was about $29 a week is what the average person got. And the SNAP challenge said, hey, if you want to experience what people on SNAP are experiencing and how they have to limit their food choices based on this meager amount of money, you try to survive 1 week on food you buy with only $29. This is what Gwyneth Paltrow bought. She did not last 4 days. And many people looked at what she bought and were like, this person totally does not understand the economic realities of food purchases. There is no way that that's a week of meals. Yet again, this is a part of her moralization of food. Well, I'm getting healthy and green and organic and beautiful foods, but you're not getting filling foods. You're not getting foods that are actually going to sustain you in terms of your work week, in terms of even just the minimum number of calories you need. Even if you were totally sedentary, that is not the minimum number of calories that she would need. She had no understanding of what the reality of low income and working class folks are who are on SNAP. They have to make decisions around what's going to give me the most calories for my buck, right? So a box of macaroni and cheese, some people are going to moralize that and say, no, that's an inferior food choice. But it's actually a superior food choice for these folks who are saying this represents an entire meal. This represents something that can actually get me through the day. Rice and beans and a box of macaroni. And one of the cheapest beverages you can get are sodas. And that's because of how much the government subsidizes corn syrup, as we know, or corn production and therefore corn syrup. And so if I want a cheap, flavorful beverage, I might grab a soda. There is an elitism, again, a classism to what foods are considered superior foods, what foods are considered the healthiest or ideal foods. And so we need to remember class implications around food as well. This is a quote on the internalized, again, thinking about things that people internalize around their class status. So this is a quote from Dorothy Allison in an essay that explores her class roots and how she had this negative sense of being as a result of her class. So the fact that the inescapable impact of being born in a condition of poverty, that this society finds shameful, contemptible, and somehow deserved, has had dominion over me to such an extent that I've spent my life trying to overcome or deny it. So, in conclusion, these are just some questions for us to mull over. We're going to spend the next 12 minutes just questions, answers, having dialogue with one another. But how do we challenge or transform this in our society? So what does the food revolution look like? Because there's a lot of abuse and a lot of harm happening with our current relationship with food. So what does the revolution look like? How are we going to transform our relationship with food in this society? Who is going to be growing, harvesting, and preparing this food? What role will organizations like yours play in this revolution? What does a just and anti-oppressive food and agricultural system look like? What do we want the future of food and agriculture to be in the US? These are just some questions for us to think about. So this was meant to give you some lenses on how to look at food through an anti-oppressive lens, food and agriculture, and some questions for you to take back to your family, to your friends, to your organization. What does our role in this look like? What role will I play as an individual in the food revolution and transforming our relationship with food in the US? Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing and I'll put those questions in chat. And then would just like to have a little dialogue with you all, questions and answers. But thank you all so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And then again, let's chat for a little bit and then we'll end at 30 minutes on the hour. Thank you. So I put those questions in chat. If you'd like to follow me on Patreon, I have a Patreon exclusive events and discussions. So you can follow me and support me by donating to me monthly on Patreon. And then this is my email. So please reach out to me if you would like presentations on anti-oppression. I specialize in anti-racism and anti-sexism. Obviously, I do climate justice, environmental justice, food justice, those topics as well. Organizational allyship, lots of different kind of topics. So if you're interested in a presentation for me, please reach out. And then, I also do organizational consultation, coaching, all of that good stuff. So yeah, questions, comments, reactions.
I'll chime in. I think the future of food is we need to move, disassemble this large global monolithic food system and go back to more of a local, regional food system. We need to welcome workers of all types to raise food. I'm on the board of the Sustainable Iowa Land Trust, and our goal is to make land available to food farmers and protect land with conservation easements. And we're trying to circle 10 cities with 10 farms in 10 years to preserve farmland around urban areas and create food hubs that bring healthy table food to all people. And part of that is to make land available to BIPOC and underserved communities.
Mm-hmm.
And so to do away with redlining, and a lot of the rural towns in Red Oak are food deserts. They only have dollar stores with no grocery stores.
Yep, absolutely.
And so one idea my husband and I are playing around with is creating a mobile food hub that would go to each of the small towns around ours 1 day a week to deliver farmer fresh produce and staples, so they wouldn't have to travel 20 miles for groceries. Now, many of them make once a week trips. But that way they could have more healthful food during the week.
Absolutely. So I think urban farming is a big has a big role in a lot of this. Also, who we're training to do that kind of farming. So lots of people can engage in urban farming or can have a small plot where they grow their own food, but teaching those skills to children, growing that food and distributing that to urban kind of centers. Maybe there's even a relationship with a school district or something like that, where food can be provided to a school. All of that I think is really good. And we're actually teaching people skills like where their food comes from, what growing food really is like. So I love urban farms, and they have a lot of educational and supplementary nutrition value.
Yeah, and technically, Sustainable Iowa Land Trust has done an analysis, and if we had 600 10-acre farms or 20-acre farms, I'm losing the statistics, we could feed every man, woman, and child living in Iowa a minimum daily requirement of calories for the season. Now, we can't do year round in Iowa because of weather, but I mean, it's so simple, and that's less than 10% of the Iowa agricultural land. I think it's like 5%. We could be feeding everyone local nutritional food.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. Let me see, Stephanie, I'm gonna read yours out loud, your comment. Thinking with your I words, Reagan, I tend to think a lot about damaging and liberatory ideologies. Some that I think are especially damaging are ideas around individuality, the idea that any person is an island rather than part of a social ecological system, and relatedly to very narrow patriarchal, racist, colonial ideas about what kind of knowledge counts as expertise. Yes, absolutely. So lived experience not being considered expertise. This individuality also has specific, the way we think about who the individual, what the individual is, or the individual in isolation from society and community, that also has like Western philosophical origins as well. And so there's like Rene Descartes and how he thinks about the individual, like I think, therefore I am. There's Friedrich Hegel, who's like, who's a German philosopher, is like, I can't understand myself without reference to others. There's the is it the Swahili philosophy? Oh, I can't remember. It's not, I can't remember where it comes from. It's in Kwanzaa too, but it comes from I think it comes from like a certain cultural origin. But the term Ubuntu, which means I am because we are, this notion that, again, I can't understand myself without you. I don't exist without you. You don't exist without me. Part of being human is also the human collective and the human experience. And that concept shows up in a lot of African and Eastern philosophy, the notion of you as a collective. So yeah, I could talk all day about philosophy, but yeah, I think some of those ways of thinking, those have been dangerous. Those are ways of thinking that at least have had downsides that have been amplified and manifested in the US and some of these other societies in the West. And then Michelle, you said, what will the food revolution look like? I'm a solar punk, so who is going to be growing and harvesting and preparing the food collectively and very well compensated in manners that do not cost the health of the agrarians to keep us fed? What role organizations like yours play in the revolution? It's early days still for us, but I will continue to develop culturally relevant food, Afro-Caribbean in my case, on the little patch we work. Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Well, relative. Go ahead.
No, I was saying you should go ahead. Yeah.
Relative to that, in our county, we wrote into our solar ordinance that either native plants or food farming or pollinator plant should be part of a solar installation. And there's a lot of work on having farming under solar panels, because with global warming, the shade of the solar panels will benefit in a lot of communities to protect plants. So I think we need to look at new ways. Just don't build huge solar farms where it's barren underneath the solar panels.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I hadn't heard that before, but yeah, how are we utilizing land in the most productive way we can is definitely something that I think is steeped in a lot of different traditions and a lot of different holistic understandings of land. So I think that's really cool. I also love like hydroponics. When I first learned about that, like, oh, like fish can fertilize the plants that we're growing, and then the plants oxygenate the water for the fish. I was like, that is awesome. And like, and I know that it's growing, but I would love to see just more and more expansion of that, because I think that addresses so many, so many use of land kind of issues that we have around that.
Although it takes a lot of energy to run a hydroponic operation.
If it's solar energy, then that's cool.
Yeah,
if not, we need to make it efficient.
Yeah.
Renewable energy.
Mm-hmm.
Any last thoughts? We have a couple of minutes. One final thought or question, or anything some folks want to share?
This is Terry. I'm in Indianapolis, Indiana. I've enjoyed your presentation and really have been thinking a lot about what we have going on in our community. And there's a couple examples that I gave. One is Flanner House, which has a farm, the Ujama bookstore, a grocery store, very accessible groceries, and a cafe. A lot of art and expression happening there, very Black identified centered place. And then the Kepler Institute, which is a youth-based kind of advocacy organization, really empowering youth voice, but they have a real significant food justice component. The CSA, they have a lot happening. And they just bought a 17-acre farm, which I'm serving on the advisory board for. So just want to give some examples there of kind of just thinking differently about food and kind of anchoring it in a community. And really empowering the community and also focusing on youth, which I think is really, really kind of key. But yeah, I really enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And appreciate y'all coming. especially with the snafu this morning. But we're going to be emergent, and we're like, yes, there we've learned a lesson. And double check our time zones.
That's how we do it.
Yes, exactly. So it's like, no, I've learned, like we adapted, we changed it up, we learned to always double check time zones. So yeah, I appreciate y'all being able to join this evening.
Yes. Thank you so much, Reagan. Really appreciated having you. I learned a ton. And thank you all for joining us for this session.
Thank you so much. Stephanie, just real quick, I sent an email to Amy, but if it's possible to send out the video of this to folks who, had signed up for the morning session and then couldn't attend the evening session, or if you might already be planning on doing that, I just wanted to flag that for you, and then also send an email for Amy, because I just want to make sure folks, if they, couldn't attend the second time, then that they still get to see it.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll definitely do that.
Okay.
We're going to make the recordings of all the sessions available for everyone who attended the conference, and
Yay!
we'll flag yours for folks who signed up for the session for this morning. So thank you.
All right, that sounds great. Thank you so much.
All right, take care.
Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.